One of the most common questions we get when we sell a set of tunes to a Cummins is whether or not you should select transmission tuning. The short answer to that question is
yes, you should.
What?
But if you'd like to know more information about why, well, stick around for the rest of the video and we'll go for a drive in that truck.
Blah, into the next gear. Ah, look at that flare shift. Mint. This is terrible.
This video is going to cover the 68 RFE because it has transmission tuning available. The G56 is a manual, so you don't need to tune that, and the ASIN doesn't currently have any, if much, transmission tuning options available, so we're only going to talk about the 68 for the video. To fully understand why we think the transmission needs tuning, let's go out for a drive in a completely stock truck.
Transmission tuning is one of the best modifications you can do to a truck with a 68. Not only is it going to increase the reliability down the road by increasing the clamping pressure of the clutches by running the line pressure up to 180 psi, it's also going to increase how the truck interacts with you in a way that is far more intuitive than the factory shift settings. CAFE standards, fuel economy standards, and competition between brands means this truck at almost every single speed is chasing the highest gear possible. And that can make it really slow to respond to throttle inputs, trying to get a trailer moving, and if you've got an aftermarket turbocharger, either a slightly larger VGT or a non-VGT turbo that requires more RPM to get spooled, you're constantly having to put your foot into it, wait for it to finally decide to downshift, and then start spooling the turbocharger. That was a flare shift. And what that is between the 3 and 4 shift, the torque converter's unlocked, and you'll notice the RPM go from about 2 to 2200 down to about 1700. That's a flare shift where it unlocks, slips the clutch a little bit, and then funks itself into the next gear, and it's kind of an unpleasant gear change. And that's why on lots of transmission tuning files, and ours specifically, they have third gear lockups and third gear locked shifts. So from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, all of those gear changes are going to be fully locked. That means you're just going to get a nice crisp gear change to the next gear. The other thing you'll notice with stock transmission tuning is the 68 RFE doesn't seem to understand how the Cummins builds power. I'm accelerating and I want to go a little bit faster. So I'm putting my foot in, it's not quite doing what I want, I just want to go a little bit faster than we are now. Oh, and all of a sudden it's dropped a gear and I'm accelerating way more than I was initially asking for. My throttle wasn't even halfway down and it all of a sudden drops a gear and makes me accelerate way more than I wanted to. The Cummins can make a ton of power with not very much revs because it's a straight 6, it's got a variable geometry turbo. You can really roll into it without having to downshift so long as the transmission holds the gear and lets you build the power using that low end torque. Or it can downshift progressively and give you gears earlier on, and then it can use higher RPM, horsepower, and boost to make you go forward. But what the stock transmission tuning does is it just holds the gear at very little throttle, so you're not actually building any kind of power because there's no fuel and boost to do so. And then when you give it a tiny bit more, it drops 2 gears, and you accelerate far more than you intended to at a mid-throttle input. There's no progressiveness in the downshifting. Aftermarket transmission tuning will either hold gears better so that you can be nearly full throttle, building off that torque of the Cummins with high boost and fuel, or you can have it set where it'll downshift more progressively so that you get the higher end power. If you have a bigger turbo, a lift kit, big tires, and you need RPM to move instead of torque, you can have it shift down sooner. The stock transmission tuning does neither. It's really annoying. So let's go put something better in here and test that out.
I cannot believe that passed QC. Someone did the coding for that, drove it around and said, yep, insanity to see, but that's exactly what we're given from the factory and that is what we're looking to fix, starting with our standard transmission tune.
What I'm currently running in the truck is our standard transmission tune, which means it's got slightly elevated shift points, it's got a third gear torque converter lockup, and it's got higher line pressure. The higher line pressure is going to have the clutches holding together better to hold more power and less chance of slipping down the road. This increases the lifespan of your problematic to slipping 68 RFE. It's also got slightly raised shift points, and even with this mild tune, you're already noticing a more responsive truck. You need to make a quick lane change because there's a slow vehicle in front of you, or you've got a trailer that you want to keep the momentum up when you're coming up towards a hill. The responsiveness of the truck being closer to the power band is always noticeable. Does transmission tuning make a race truck out of a 45 horsepower tune? No. It makes a truck that's just more intuitive to live with. As I pull away from the light, the other thing you'll notice is the third gear lockup. It's probably going to happen right around now, where it locks the torque converter in third and keeps it locked from third through sixth. Torque converter lockup makes the truck feel more direct, it makes your power feel more linear, and if you have slightly raised shift points, it doesn't lug the truck underneath the turbo. It means that you have much more throttle response, your acceleration is instantaneous, and it doesn't have that fluctuation of the torque converter. It also helps with the 3/4 shift. The 3/4 shift in a 68 constantly flares up. That is eliminated by having the torque converter locked up through the shifts. You will notice it's a little more firm, but it's not a large difference, and it certainly helps with reliability to get rid of that flare. Standard transmission tuning works really well on a stock or lightly modified truck. If you move to a large non-VGT turbo or a lift kit with big tires, then I would go for the next step up, which is a raised shift point tune. We're going to head back to the shop quick and throw one of those on this truck to really showcase to you how that changes the shifting points.
That is probably some of my favorite transmission tuning that we offer. I would put that on a completely stock truck. If you're going for heavier modifications, then there is another step up from there.
Now that we've got a high shift point tune in the truck, you'll start to notice that it's going to climb above 2,000 RPM almost every single gear change as you're accelerating. This is to make sure that if you have a big turbo or big tires, it's going to keep on top of that turbocharger, because sometimes they don't spool until 14, 15, 16, 1700 RPM. And so you've got to make sure the engine is working at a power band where it can actually spool that turbo. The other thing you might notice is that the truck only has so many gears. So sometimes when you're on light throttle cruising, it might actually seem like it's cruising at a normal shift point tune, but it's going to be so much more responsive to downshifts, and that's really another point of the tune. Whereas in a normal shift point tune, you're going to have to roll into the gas a whole bunch, and even then it might only drop one gear. On a high shift point tune, it's much more sensitive to dropping gears, which means when you put your foot into it, it'll actually downshift and light up that turbo that you might have.
That's a great transmission tuning option for big tires and lift kits because it kind of gets around the fact that you still have stock gearing. We would probably never sell a high shift point kit if every single person who bought a lift kit and tires would also bought a rear gear set to make the truck drive more like it did from factory, but that's another discussion for another day. That tuning will help you drive as intuitively as possible when you're driving a big lifted truck. And to have it in a stock transmission tune file would just be painful. And every single one of the things we talked about is still modifiable. You can have a second gear, a third gear, or a fourth gear lockup. You can have smooth transmission shifts. You can have high shift points, medium shift points, or low shift points, or stock transmission tuning entirely with a higher line pressure. Every single piece of a 68 is modifiable, which is actually what makes it one of the best transmissions offered behind the 68, because both automatics are going to blow up. At least the 68 you can make drive how you want it. We hope that was useful in deciding whether or not you want transmission tuning. It was a little insight into what it actually changes. If you do have any questions or you're wanting to make your own tune file, feel free to reach out to us at dirtydieselcustoms.ca and we will be happy to answer any of your questions. Thanks for watching.